Empowering humanity, supporting unity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PAZMESA Playhouse, the place where you come to play, slay, and lay down the way to be your realest, truest self. I'm Janie, the Mindfulness Coach, and I'm here with
Angel Santiago, also known as Life Coach Angel.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't already subscribed to our Rise Above TV channel, be sure to click that subscribe button. If it resonates with you and you think this information would be of service to somebody that you know, share it because
like,
you guys,
comment, share.
Yeah, man, because you're helping us spread the love. It's about the PAZMESA Pulse. PAZMESA means peace within. It also means peace table. Thank you for coming to our table today.
Yeah, man. So we've been breaking down peace. In the first episode, we talked about what peace is. Then we broke down the acronym. Mm-hmm. And then the second episode, we talked about the first P, which is for patience. Mm-hmm. Then in the third episode, we talked about E, which is equanimity. Mm-hmm. And now we're on the fourth episode talking about the A, which is acceptance.
Yes, acceptance. That last E is equality. Today, acceptance is a big one. Like, we could do multiple episodes just on acceptance, on all the different topics I'd love to cover, but we're gonna kind of hone in on a few things here. And acceptance can kind of be triggering for some people because when they hear that word, they think like, oh, I have to accept bad behavior from other people, like accept all that is as it is, and that somehow it means no boundaries. You know what I mean? Not having these like healthy boundaries. But before you can establish healthy boundaries, you have to know what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel unsafe. And a lot of the traumas that we've experienced when we were young are shaping our perception of self and even our health, like our internal inner space, our inner world and our external world. It's impacting our relationships. It's impacting us at work. It's impacting how we're showing up in life. And being able to accept that truth, which we'll touch on a little bit later, is also important because we need to take accountability and responsibility for our well-being. And also how we are being is impacting our well-being and how we are being in the world. Like, how are we really showing up? Because now more than ever, peace and love, as cheesy and kumbaya as it sounds, when you truly understand that it's not love, is not just this emotion, but it's like what all of creation is really coming from. And when you know how to tap into that, truly tap into that, and, Angel uses a wide variety of, well, you've used a lot of healing modalities, and so have I, to kind of finally get to this place. But meditation has been a really big power source for you, like a medicine that brought you into full presence. Because I feel like the first P on peace could actually also, aside from patience, it's about presence. When you're present, when you're mindful, when you're really in the now, and you are aware, accepting that your words, thoughts, and actions are coming from a deeper place. I think so. It's kind of like this journey, this inner exploration that people go on when you hear them like talking about self-improvement or like personal growth. It's this, a lot of times people start with things externally, but this always ends up going internally.
Yeah. So to get us started, I want to first read the definition of acceptance, just because I feel like the definition itself kind of gives us the focus for the episode. And I'm going to really focus on 3 of the definitions. There's 4 here, but I'm only going to read 3. So acceptance is the action or process of being received as adequate or suitable. Number 2, acceptance is agreement with or belief in an idea, opinion, or explanation. And number 3, acceptance is the willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. Now, based on all those 3, this is kind of what we've kind of come up with as like the focus of the episode, which is acceptance of yourself and all that entails, acceptance of the process of growing and evolving and healing and becoming, acceptance of what is, again, the circumstances that are coming at us, but from a neutral place, not seeing them as good or bad. And then lastly is acceptance of the collective experience, the universal laws that exist in the world, and then how you're showing up impacts the world around you. And so the more we work on ourselves and the more we spend time in each of these things, the better we become, the better we are at each of those things. So let's talk about the first one. acceptance of yourself. That works on a lot of levels.
Yeah, it does.
Right? So you were saying something about like what that involves. What is
Right.
acceptance of yourself?
Of yourself. Well, I think first of all, accepting the cards that you were dealt, because a lot of people, you know, unfortunately, right? It feels like unfortunate to be born into a family where neither your mother or father knew what it meant to be a healthy caretaker.
Right.
And if that happens, then you automatically don't feel safe, because the way a child naturally, like just the way we're built, the way we operate, the way a child feels safe is when they're seen, heard, felt, understood. When that happens, they feel accepted. When they feel accepted, they feel safe. But it's not just those things too. It's just, there's a lot of the state of the household, the people that are living in the house, how much chaos
the
is
state of
going
everything,
on.
the state of consciousness of
Yes.
the house, the people that are there, everything.
All of it. Yeah. Like just all these ideas are coming to my mind,
Well,
but I don't want to describe a house that's super chaotic.
Right.
But if you're dealing with what we just said a little while ago, emotional and mental neglect, physical abuse, but just not just abuse, but like the being neglected is a form of abuse. And some people have physically also been abused and or sexually. So if all that happened to you when you were a child, there's a lot of belief structures that got implemented into your psyche that's infiltrating your perception, which infiltrates your perception of self and your relationship with yourself and your body. Because all of this, if it's unresolved and you don't learn to look at it and work with it, instead you suppress, repress, that leads to depression and inflammation in the body. So a lot of pain, physical pain, we now know, a lot of the research shows that your mental health and emotional health, if they're not at ease, you'll end up experiencing some type of illness or disease, right? So it's accepting these deeper parts of ourselves and then getting really curious, like childlike explorers, like with a lot of compassionate curiosity.
Based on what you're saying, to me, it's like you can't, for you to accept yourself today with where you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? You have to accept where you come from.
Right.
Like you said, the whole entire shebang, right?
Yeah, the family
all
ties and all that stuff.
But with the understanding that accepting it doesn't mean that you're like condoning what they did, or like you're like it's okay for them to do what they did. That's not what it is. It's just accepting the fact that it did happen to you. And now we can grow from that. We can look at that and be like, okay, well, why did that happen to me? Again, like you said, you grew up in a family that didn't know any better.
Right.
They didn't have like the best examples on how to truly love or be nurturing or be encouraging for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And then looking at your past, like, hey, they did the best with what they knew how.
Yeah.
And so now here's where I am. And so for me to look at that, that's where even gratitude comes into the picture. Where you can even like talk about like accepting something, you have to understand it. So when you're willing to accept it, when you're willing to look at it, then you're willing to explore it, then you're willing to understand it, then you're willing to embrace it, then you can like get the growth from, you can release it, and you can get the benefit of the growth of why that challenging experience came to you.
Right. And I want people to understand that when you have been abused in whatever way it happened, there was a victimization, like you were victimized, but you do not have to stay, because what happened is in those moments, it started to build a victim mentality mindset, a disempowered, helpless self. And so,
but it's understandable.
Right. But it's understandable. It's like you start to see how and why it happened, like he said. And when you're able to see it in a new way where someone can help you with that, and then give you the tools you need to really take back autonomy and sovereignty of the body, because
you take back your power, and now it becomes an empowering experience.
Yes, because they robbed you of power, and there's a piece of your power, right, quote unquote, that's left in the past that you need to like reclaim. That's a great word. Reclaiming parts of ourselves And that in itself leads to this one, which is that is a process. Getting comfortable with the fact that we have collectively, not just in your own personal family tribe, but collectively, we've also bought into a lot of ideas, narratives, and ideologies that don't really serve us anymore, like where our worth comes from and what success means and things like that. So that's a piece of it. But there's a process that we have to go through in order to kind of rise above all of that. You have to
Right.
walk through it and see it and understand it, like you said, and then you come out on the other side. So go ahead and talk a little bit about the process.
So that's the next part. It's like accepting that the process of healing, the process of growing, the process of evolving, it is a process in and of itself. And sometimes the process is painful. And sometimes the process is challenging and it's uncomfortable and it's difficult, but to get past, to release a lot of our deep wounds and our deep traumas or traumatic experiences, however you want to see it, sometimes you have to sort of go through them in a way, and not physically because you're not there anymore, they're in the past, but like you have to revisit them and you have to kind of go through them and then start seeing them differently, and then give them the wisdom and the understanding of the tools that we have available today. And not only that, but you've grown from that. You're no longer that little boy, that little girl, so it's like revisiting it in this process. It's not easy.
Yeah, and I think one of the parts that are the most difficult for many people, and I know you and I have experienced this in different ways, is loss. Because when we have things that are good and we have our gains, it's real easy to stay in a good space. But when something is taken from you, or when you realize you have to walk away from something, for example, we're talking about family. And one of the more difficult things is having to cut off relationships. And sometimes as you grow and evolve and change, the people closest to you do not. And it doesn't mean that you still can't have some sort of connection, but sometimes when you evaluate them and you see the level of toxicity, sometimes you do have to walk away from it. You outgrow these things.
Because as you grow, you outgrow. And then unless those people, those connections are growing along the same path as you, along the same direction as you, you unfortunately outgrow them.
Yeah, and sometimes the universe or God they'll just kind of fall off the face of the earth. Something will happen, like you'll lose your job. And again, going back to the accepting that perspective of like all is in my favor. How can I look at this and really use this to grow, or to maybe step out of my comfort zone to expand myself in some way? Because anytime you do that, there's always going to be gains. So losses always lead to gains if you can understand it from a higher perspective.
Right.
And as
what I hear you saying is like, if you don't do it on your own, then God will create a situation where like it's going to shift you.
Yes.
It's time to shift out of that situation.
Yes.
Maybe oftentimes when you get way too freaking comfortable.
That's true.
When you get way too comfortable.
To the point you're like accepting mediocrity.
You're settling maybe, and you're just way too comfortable. You're not being challenged. You almost feel like, I don't know, stagnant.
Yeah, it's almost like apathy. A person can kind of get to
so something will happen that will shift you or snap you out of it.
It'll like shock you. That's when I say life will throw you different types of natural disasters, and sometimes multiple at the same time, like a tsunami and a volcano and an earthquake
at the
same time. Like your mom dies, and then you lose your job, and your dog gets lost, and you're like, what is going on right now? Really? Now this? What else, God? What else are you going to throw me? Not that everybody gets to that place, but that's very common.
Right, it's very common.
So I'm not trying to shame. This is just observation and reflection as we go through this maturation.
Which that reaction is very natural, because it's the very human part of us that's like, what the heck is going on? Like, why am I going through this? And as normal as that is, and as you should allow yourself to feel that, there's also another place that you can go to, which is like, okay, what's happening? This is happening for a reason. What do I need to see? How do I need to grow?
Right. And
what do I need to learn from this?
Sometimes you need an assistant, like a guide
or
somebody.
You need a coach or a therapist or someone.
And it's not always a friend. A lot of times we go to friends, but you have to look at their life and their level of joy and their level of peace and stuff like that. So be very mindful of who you go to when you share. Because you want somebody who can hold space for your pain, but at the same time still see your highest potentiality existing in the moment of your pain. And one of the things that is really interesting, as you have as you go through transformation, there's like a metamorphosis. That's another good word, right? Just like the caterpillar turns into the butterfly. Well, this is kind of a quest. There's a lot of journeys within the overarching story of your life, which is a quest. You're going to have a lot of different metamorphoses, and that is acceptance of death. So there's like the bigger death, right? Like you can't have life without death. Like all of us will end up having to accept our death.
Right.
And that is a subject in itself. And if you can get to that place, that's beautiful, because you will be more alive while you are living. Instead of worrying about how you're going to die and when you're going to die, just FYI. But what I don't want to really get deep into that death, I want to get into the egoic death. And so there's a lot of pieces of our identity that were put in place based on our traumatized self. So when you're no longer traumatized and no longer disempowered, well, that's going to be a whole different thing. So there's 5 stages of death that...
the grief of death.
Yes, the grief of death. And
But
by the way, Angel...
What you're saying is that as we grow and evolve and we heal, there's going to be parts of us that sort of fall off or they die. And you have to sort of let them so that you can become the new. It's like It's like the snake shedding that skin.
Yes, and
you shed the skin so that you can be renewed in this new way of thinking, new way of being. Yep.
Yes, like rebirth.
So we have to get really comfortable.
Yes.
With going through those mini deaths that happen along the way.
Yes.
Right. But here's the challenge. One of the number one fears in the world for people is death.
Yeah, I know.
So that's why that makes that part of the process so difficult.
Yes.
Because we're actually experiencing a form of death. And so for you to become who you want to be, you have to let go of who you think you are, or who you've been up to that point.
Yep.
And then embody this new you.
Yep. And even habits have to die.
Yep.
Certain friendships have to come to an end. We have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable part of this. And when you go through grief, you have to know how to compassionately hold space for the mourning process. I'd like to say that you'll stay in a high vibe place all the time with everything that you shed. Some things you're not going to have to go through deep grief.
Some things you will.
But some things you will. And when that happens, know that these are the 5 stages of death, and you can jump around. Sometimes you might be in one, but get assistance when you're in them. And it helps accepting that this is part of the process. So usually the first is denial, shock and denial. And then there's bargaining. And then there's anger, depression. And then finally, guess what? The last one is acceptance. You can't get to a place of acceptance until you can accept that you're going to go through these phases.
They're just part of the process.
Yes, and exactly. And when I went through my divorce, that was really difficult. I thought, oh, cool. These are the 5. Once I'm done with anger, then it's just this. And then it was like, no, it comes in ways. Yes. Yeah. And y'all, let me just say this too. Rage and anger is really deep inside of our nervous systems and our bellies. When we were kids, if you were not nurtured and loved and taken care of and seen and given all the proper, just basic things to raise like a healthy human being, there are parts of us in the past that are really agitated by that. And that's where a lot of our anxieties and stuff are coming from. So I highly, highly recommend that when you do this work on yourself, that you do it from the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual space.
And grief is not just for losses to death. It's any kind of loss. You could even be like losing an important item that means so much to you. Like imagine like a child losing their blanket. That's a loss for the child. That's traumatic. And so the same thing happens to us. And so if you want some support with that, in the I Evolve podcast, which is my podcast, you've been seeing commercials for it. I did an entire season on the 5 stages of grief. So definitely go check that out on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. The grief season. It's called Good Grief.
This might be a good little place right here to stop and take a quick break for these special messages.
We'll be right back. The I Evolve podcast is a podcast focusing on the evolution of an individual who is in continuous motion towards their best self.
Rise Above TV offers mindful content for optimal living and loving. Check out P3, where conscious entrepreneurs share how they've tapped into their power, passion, and purpose. Season 3 coming soon.
But the thing about this process is like, again, it ebbs and flows. Mm-hmm. Then you're gonna be on the down part of the wave, and then you're gonna be on the up part of the wave. But when we're on the down part of the wave, we think like, man, like, how long is this gonna go? and then you're like, well, I've been here before, and it wasn't this hard. Well, sometimes you're working through the different layers of the pain or
Of
what
the
happened, or the
darkness.
darkness, and it's like
Yeah.
some of it is going to be a little bit harder. It's like video games.
Yeah.
When you're playing level 1 and then you win level 1 and you go to level 2 is going to be a little harder than level 1. I'm moving forward, I'm progressing, I'm evolving, I'm getting better. But then level 2, it's like, okay, it's a little bit harder. Now imagine level 7. How much more harder level 7 is?
I know, but you also
you've
get
had
extra
1, 2,
tools.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of experience in those levels,
years, yep.
and resources that you've acquired.
Yeah, because then each time you go up, they give you new tools.
Correct.
Like, okay, now we're gonna give you a fireball, but these cool things are gonna come off of it now.
Yeah, think
where
about
you
Super
can-
Mario Brothers.
Yeah, where you can kind of, or then you also find shortcuts.
Yep.
And you find like you
You-
start to see what's a booby trap.
You run faster.
Right.
You learn little tricks. Your remote, you're easier to use the remote. That you've memorized the buttons. Like
Yeah.
it's another level of hard, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I can do this.
Right, because the resilience, you start to build when you have inner awareness and inner acceptance, like self-acceptance, self-awareness, and you're also in a place of accountability, like you really want to take responsibility for how you're showing up, you'll take the process more seriously. You'll be more committed to it. You'll find the tools that work for you to get you through it. You'll find the right therapists or coaches or whatever, or books.
Yeah, you'll get
right?
the right inner outer resources.
Yes, to assist you.
And even though it may be hard, or you may feel like it's a little bit more difficult than before, it's not permanent.
Yeah, and it's like a slingshot.
It's a temporary part of the process.
Somebody gave me a really cool analogy where a lot of times when a person is on this personal growth journey and this, I call it self-discovery, self-love journey, sometimes we will end up, quote unquote, making a mistake, right? Some sort of mishap. Something will occur and we're like, God, we should have known better. And we start like shooting all over ourselves,
Right.
And then we think, am I really back to that square one? It's not always the case. It's kind of like with the slingshot. So that was the analogy. You have to pull the rock back because it's getting ready to go like really extra
or
far.
The arrow.
There you
the
go,
arrow
the
goes
arrow,
back
I
before
love
it goes forward.
Yes, perfect.
But it doesn't
So-
mean that you're
you're-
digressing, or that you're
it-
devolving.
Right.
It's
It
just,
could look like that, but
but
it's
it's
all
not.
about how you perceive it to be. We can let go of that thought.
and it's cyclical, but the cyclical there has a forward momentum to it. So even
Yeah.
though you're still moving forward, you have to go around and come back to the back and then go forward again.
Yeah, seasons. It's like
It's like the season, and it's the ebb and flow of the wave. There's a down wave and an up wave. There's a down wave and an up wave.
And there's also a point in an experience showing up in your life again, even though you think you've already sort of evolved from it and kind of like transmuted it or risen above it. So you're like, I'm not going to have to deal with that again. And then here it is showing itself again.
Well,
it's a way to gauge your growth. That's
yes,
what you'll notice.
And because there's 4 levels that you have to deal with any particular lesson. There's a physical component,
right,
or physical level or physical plane.
Mhm.
There's an emotional plane.
Mhm.
There's a mental plane, and there's a spiritual plane.
Thank
And so you might have already dealt with that lesson at one of those 3,
Right.
but then you still have one more, or one of those 2, and then you
Yeah.
still have one more. And it's like, I thought I had already dealt with this.
Yeah.
Or I thought I had done the work in this. Yes, you did it in one level. Now you're doing it at another level. And so
Mhm.
that's the part of the process that we're talking about, accepting it.
Yeah.
If we keep looking at it as like, fuck, this process sucks and it's hard, and
Yeah.
and if we're looking at it like that, we're gonna struggle with it.
And we're going to suffer more and
Yep.
it's going to take longer. But if you want to go through this as efficiently and effectively as possible,
And it's
then
effortless. You
as
surrender to
effort-
it.
That's what I was just
You
going to
surrender
say.
to it.
You surrender to the truth because there's a bigger truth that's going on. And you've already been going through it a few times that you just realize this is part of the process. And in order to make progress, we need to be okay with these little moments and rest in them, like just trust. It's also in building our faith.
Right. And I think I'm glad you said that. When it comes to faith, this is something that really helps go through the process and see it in the way that you're describing it. It's just like, it doesn't matter what the experience is, whether it's quote unquote good or bad, or
Right, like uncomfortable or joyful.
If you can trust and have faith in the fact that no matter what the experience is coming to support you, to grow you, it's for you. It's not against you.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter where it comes from, good or bad, it's coming to grow you, and it's not coming to destroy you. If you can understand that, then it gives you the ability to look at the process as like, okay, this process is for me.
Yeah, you start to see all things as a gift. And when it is coming from that sort of more uncomfortable space, you understand immediately its growth. And when you learn a lot of these other little pieces of this whole process and they become sort of second nature to you, you're able to find and discover that really quickly.
Yeah.
Really quickly.
Mhm.
Like sometimes it happens and then you need like a day or two and then it finally kind of like, oh, it comes together. But when you've been practicing this and you're really consistent and devoted and start to see it from that perspective, the possibilities open up so much
Right.
for that information to come through because you're clear.
Mhm.
You're saying to the universe and to God and to life itself and to you, right? You're an extension of it. Like I desire to hear and see the truth. Give it to me.
Mhm.
Give it to me. And sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, but you know what? And at the end of the day, you realize always it's refining you.
Mhm.
It's refining you.
Yeah, it really is. And with that brings us to the next level, which is accepting of what is. Each of those experiences that we're discussing right now, accepting them for what they are, that they're part of that process, and that, again, repeating to what I said a minute ago, they're here to help us. They're here to grow us, not to destroy us. And so that's the part of it that it helps the process, accept the process and accept what is, and be in that neutral zone, being neutral to what is and to what's coming.
Right.
You know?
Yes. We were talking about there's polarity and duality, right? And that's just going to be here.
Yep. That's just the nature of things.
Right. And when you train, I kind of call it like the divine love mind because the mind is going to do its thing. But when you really learn to like cleanse the mind of all the viruses and everything that they have, and you understand how to use power of breath and how to really direct your train of thought with intention. This is all part, that's why I love mindfulness so much because it's really about learning to, it's about paying attention on purpose in the now, non-judgmentally. And when I talk about paying attention, you're paying attention to a lot of different things. Now, for some people that could sound like really like, you know what I mean? There's so much to listen to, but when you train yourself to come from the observer, where you're just witnessing your mind, body, or we'll say ego or whatever, have a reaction to what's coming up, and then you're not acting from it. You're just experiencing it. You're allowing it. You're feeling it. You're witnessing it. You're like, wow, look at that. I feel really disrespected right now. It's hitting me in my stomach and I'm thinking this right now. It's going internally and then being able to use that data for your greater good. And the more you start to be, it's really neat because it's not like you're just going to immediately stop being hard on yourself because you start noticing it, right? It's what brings you relief is that you realize, oh, that's what it does, but I don't always have to believe all this horrible stuff that it's saying.
You don't always have to believe what you're thinking.
What do you think is a good way to do, like, what's a good question to ask sometimes? Like,
well, there's one easy question that you can ask at any moment. Like, how much of this is this really true? Like, do I have evidence of this? Because a lot of times we go into this what if stories of potentially the future, right? We go into this like, or even what's happening in the present. Like we just go into our stories.
We make assumptions.
We make assumptions, and we're like, for example, someone can say like they be going after a goal or a task that they're trying to do, and they immediately go, well, what if this happens? And so then you say, okay, well, when's the last time that happened to you? And the person's like, well, come to think of it, it's never happened to me. Okay, why is that? Well, because I'm the type of person that's very organized and very disciplined, and I care about what I'm doing, and I want to make sure it succeeds. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that I do my due diligences so that nothing like that ever happens. Okay, so then why would this time be any different? If it's never happened to you and you don't have any evidence of that ever happening in your life, why even entertain it?
Right, exactly. And if you're
To me-
going to entertain it, because the brain likes to do that, right? It kind of has that critical factor. So maybe it just kind of comes in. Because you know that to be true, what you just went through
Right.
with them, right? That series of questions. That means then you can give yourself permission and room to think all of these other possibilities
Correct.
that are
That
more
could
on
go
the
right.
good side,
Yeah,
right?
that could
the
be in
positive.
alignment of what you're wanting to accomplish.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've been watching this show called Travelers on Netflix, and it's a really good show if you want to watch it. But there's one of the characters or one of the team members in the team. He can see multiple timelines happening at the same time, meaning multiple outcomes of the same moment happening at the same time, and so he can see them.
Yeah.
And so it's like when I heard you say about the observer and looking at like, oh, look at that, I'm being disrespected. Like there's multiple things happening to you in that moment at a time. So when you're observing yourself, whereas in the past you feel like, oh, I'm being disrespected, and you would react.
You believe your story.
And you
believe
it. You believe
your
the story.
Right.
Then you're gonna react to that person.
Of course, with tons of defensiveness.
Right. Even violence. Like verbal or physical violence. But now you're like choosing a different reality.
Exactly.
You're like, okay, well, I'm getting disrespected. Where's that coming from? Why do I feel that way? Where's that person? Is there any validity in what the person's feeling? Can I also take into consideration the other person's reality besides just my own? Because until we get away from just like considering only our self-experience without looking at the other person. And that's the thing about accepting the process, accepting ourselves, is that everyone is a process.
Everyone is in this process.
Everyone's in this process.
And I love that you touched on something right now that I'm glad you did, because I want to remind everybody we have to accept that everybody is having a subjective experience. We are individually having a subjective experience, and then we're collectively having an experience. And every person is going to interpret certain experiences in a very unique way based on the set of memories that they have. And their set of memories are what dictate their beliefs.
Correct.
And so we can't always know that about a person. That's why I love the C in, I guess we are PEA. Yeah. The next one will be compassionate curiosity, I believe.
Yeah.
Because how will we ever again achieve peace here on this planet if we do not leave room for diversity and our differences and our different opinions? And instead of getting really angry, just noticing our uncomfortability and anger when somebody thinks or behaves differently than us. Right. Some people can get super pissed and start feeling anxious just because somebody looks different than them. And they can start feeling like unsafe and feel like they have to defend themselves. So there's a lot of intricacies that are involved in this. And that's like a whole nother show in itself. But getting curious about that sort of stuff and studying it and understanding psychology so that we can all start to do our part to become a little wiser and more understanding and empathetic.
Right. And that brings us to the fourth one, which is accepting the collective experience and how we play a part in that. The more we can do this process for ourselves, healing, growing, evolving, as we start showing up as a more loving, nurturing, kind, joyous, peaceful human being,
yes.
the better we show up in the world, the better we show up as ourselves in the world, the better we can impact our relationships, the world around us as a whole.
Exactly. Wherever you go, you're always able to leave and make an impact or leave an impression on people. Mm-hmm. And so for us, the importance of sharing this information is because we want to help put the civil back in civilization. And somewhere along the lines, we lost our civility because we really lost the concept of brotherhood and sisterhood, like humanhood. We're so
community.
Yeah, unity and community and finding our beauty and diversity. And how boring would this world be if we were all the same color, all of our voices, we had all the same accent, all the same food. Like, what is the point in that? Culture is what really brings this world to life, is the diversity in our cultures. And there's a lot of things that divide us right now. And a big one is God. That's the sad thing, because there's been more bloodshed on this planet because people are fighting about which God is the real God and blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And if we get right down to light, if we get down to what's allowing our body, our hearts to beat right now, and it says in the Bible, God is light. And I love when God speaks to me in acronyms, and I think we've talked about it before, living in God's harmonious truth, LIGHT. That was one that I got in meditation. What does harmony mean? Well, harmony means to understand how to be at peace, how to have, and to be at peace is to really discover, who are you really? Who do you really want to be? Who do you really want to be? What have you not tried that you've been so afraid of? It's accepting our fears and getting curious about our fears and really like finding the assistance we need so that we can like step more into it, because there's also these universal laws that we're operating off of. So from a light quotient, we are all, from a physics standpoint, there's what's called quantum, and we are all part of the quantum wave. That is what connects us all. And that cannot be disputed. So we are all coming from one source of energy, from what they understand of at this point. It cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred, transmuted, and transformed. And that's what we're here to do. We are in the process. This is like an alchemical process.
Right, it is.
And there's universal laws that exist. One of them is cause and effect. And
Yeah, and like how we have a responsibility. We're responsible for ourselves. Yes, we can't, when we look at our past, there's a tendency to want to blame, to put blame on our parents or circumstances, the things that happen to us. But if we don't look at it like that, and we look at it from a place of wanting to create consciousness about what happened to us and wanting to understand what happened to us and how it shaped us, and then wanting to liberate ourselves from the effects of that upbringing so that we can be more at peace within ourselves. And so can you imagine if everyone around us is at peace with themselves? What kind of community, what kind of world, what kind of collective experience will we be creating? Right. And so we have a responsibility that, even though, yes, our parents, I'm going to say parents because that's just very general, right? It's very general, that they say, oh, well, they screwed us up, right? But now we're grown-ups, quote unquote. Now we're taking care of ourselves. So we have a responsibility now to sort of reparent ourselves so that we can heal the experience that child had when you were a child. And then when you help the child within you understand things differently, and you heal the inner child frees the adult that you are today. Like you slowly but surely start to become a 40-something-year-old, in my case, a 42-year-old, integrated conscious being that I am. Exactly. Not still trapped in what my inner child experienced when he was 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, 19, however old I was.
Yes.
We can start liberating ourselves from that.
Yes.
And that's what I mean. Like, how the better we show up for ourselves or within ourselves, the better we show up in the world and everything that we're in a relationship with.
Yes.
So,
and there's the main universal law, and there's so many, they all matter, but cause and effect, also known as reap and sow, karma.
You're the cause of your effect.
Yes, exactly. There are causes that happened that affected you, and you can go back and heal what those were, just like the inner child work that you're talking about, so that you can have a different effect, right? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And this is where we're saying it's time. It's time for us to understand the bigger truth of what's going on, and that we are all in this pool of mushy goo together. There have been some serious societal, cultural, religious wounds, a lot of different wounds that we've all taken on that have really shaped where our worth comes from. And I think we're finally starting to realize we are made of love. We come of love.
We're here to love.
We're here to love.
To be love.
To be love. God has never abandoned us. And even when we have misstepped and not believed and all this stuff, God is always, it's eternal. It doesn't stop being love. Our inheritance really is going to come from us going back into those principles that Yeshua spoke of, and some of these amazing prophets about forgiveness and compassion and mercy and friendship, and really understanding what that means. I mean, this is like really what it is. That's
a real experience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really like, that's like living in the kingdom of heaven.
And we can bridge heaven on earth.
We can really do that now.
Exactly. And that's why I love PAZMESA so much, because when you finally go through all these things that you were talking about, and you tap into your PAZMESA, And then that PAZMESA goes into your partnerships and into your parenting and into your
Into
professional
your work,
life,
right?
into your professional life and into everywhere that you go. And you'll really start to feel the love being brought back to you. You see it all the time. And then you also get into a place of servitude. It's like you realize, you know what, this thing that I'm doing on myself and for myself isn't just for me, it's for everybody.
Yep.
Because everybody deserves to be free.
We're all in the human experience. We're all here.
We're all here, man.
And it's like, it's a very narrow path, but you're not alone. You know, there's always someone in front of you, someone behind you. You know, it is because it is a very unique individual journey to you, for you, but there's other people on it, you know? And so at any point in time, you can always reach out for support, yell at the person in front of you like, hey, how was it when you did this? Or when you went through this? Or you can look back and like, hey, I was just there, man.
Yeah.
It'll be all right. Like,
yeah, because we can mentor each other.
yeah, you can make it. And so we're here together. We're all connected. And so that's why they say you want to change the world, change yourself. Because we literally impact the collective experience by being better individuals. But what happens? We're so concerned in changing everybody else. They have to do the work. They have to stop doing something. They need to be this way, and then I'll feel better. We're so busy holding everybody else responsible for our experience. We never take ownership and accountability of it, so then we can never do anything about it. Because if it's in the hands of someone else, then it's in the hands of someone else.
And then once again, it goes back to that disempowerment.
Yep.
And that is just one big illusion, delusion, lie.
But when you claim it and you own it, you're like, okay, that means I get to do something about it.
Yes.
It means I can make it whatever I want it to be.
Anything. You have it in you. It's like Gandhi said. I think it was Gandhi that said, be the change you want to see in the world, man. Peace be in you. Be the peace that you want to see in the world. And we will really start to see things shift.
For shizzle.
For shizzle my nizzle. Go to heartmap.org, by the way. That's a great website where you really start to get some cool information about the true interconnectedness and how our nervous systems sync up and how we're interconnected with the earth and all this awesome information that helps you feel more connected to all that is.
So what can someone do to start working on being more accepting today?
How about just accepting that there are two voices that are within you? There's the disempowering voice, right? The wounded self. And then there's like the empowered self.
The healthy self.
The healthy self. The one that's whole. Because it knows
it's
that
always been
whole.
Right.
That's like your soul self. And then you got like your ego self or your shadow self, right? The light and the dark, whatever you want to call it. It's like your nervous system too. Fight, flight, or freeze, or rest and digest. That's a representation of heaven and hell. And just notice, just starting to notice that is in itself a very loving thing to do. Accepting that there are the two voices and that the other voice is the temporal one that's been shaped by all of your memories. And if you got a lot of memories that are pretty like sad and yucky and scary, you know, and heavy, well,
that weighs more.
But there's what's called neuroplasticity and a bunch of other cool stuff that you can get to a place where you will believe the whole self more.
Right. The voice of the higher self more.
Yes, it will be stronger. And the only way to do that is to kind of work those muscles out.
That reminds me of the story of the two wolves, right? That there's two wolves, and one of them, the way he described it is the lower self, the egoic self. And then he talks about the other wolf, which is more of the higher self, the healthy self, the whole self. And then the grandchild was like, well, which wolf wins? And the native chief says, the one you feed the most.
Right. And this is why it's so important to find your practices. What are the things that help feed the other? Because trust me, if you do a little analysis of just what your everyday life kind of looks like, and you start to see some of the choices that you're making still that actually support the other.
You know, what I would say, because I totally agree with you, accepting of that two voices, you know, because that conversation's happening. That's a process that's happening within you.
It also creates a little space between you and it.
And, you know, there's a quote that I want to read about acceptance, because the first component that we talked about here, the first level, was accepting yourself. Well, it says here, self-acceptance is truly a heroic act. And that's a quote by Nathaniel Branden. It really is a heroic act, because what do we call this journey? This healing journey? The hero's journey.
The hero's journey.
And so self-acceptance is really that very first step.
That recognizing you're on the hero's
That
journey.
you're on
This
this
is the hero's
journey.
journey. You said yes to this lifetime.
So it
Whether
is
people
a
like to
heroic
accept
act.
that or not, that's another thing. You have to accept that you chose, and not everybody believes this, and I respect that, but we chose this incarnation.
Correct.
You're here on purpose and for a reason. And when you start to dial into all this and you feel significant and you feel
Right.
purposeful and you feel like you really do belong, those little fears of not belonging or not being good enough really just go away.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. I would say start this journey. Start this journey. The sooner the better.
You are the
Yeah.
villain and the hero,
So
man.
start the journey. Start looking at accepting yourself and go through. Even if you need to go back to the episode, go back to the episode so you can see the 4 areas that we discussed, because they're key, man.
Thank you so much again for tuning in to our show here at the PAZMESA Playhouse. Be sure to connect with us on social media at Janie the Mindfulness Coach, and
At Life Coach Angel.
of course subscribe to our YouTube channel here at Rise Above TV and our social media pages.
Yeah, and be sure you come back. So one of the things that we want to do with this show, this podcast, is really to provide you with pieces of peace for your everyday life. Thank you for tuning in.
Peace be in you.
Peace be in you.
PAZMESA Playhouse is a Rise Above TV production. To be a part of the mindfulness movement, visit riseabovetv.com and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channel. Be sure to like and follow us on social media.